Welcome. Thank you for attending the session on winning the war and winning the peace as part of the 2023 CEPA Forum. My name is Maggie Miller. I'm a cybersecurity reporter for Politico. And with me today, I have Steve Hadley, the former National Security Advisor to former U.S. President George W. Bush. Currently, he is a principal at Rice, Hadley, Gates, and Manuel, LLC. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Nice to be here.
And then on Zoom from the great country of Canada, we have Desi Shaw, the CEPA Forum Policy Pitching competition winner, who turned in a fantastic paper. Desi is a junior at the Shawnigan Lake School in Canada and is originally from California. Desi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, we'll start with you, Desi. As I mentioned, you turned in a fantastic paper that both of us have had a chance to read, and I've been told reliably that you beat out quite a few to win this competition. And I want to ask you, your entry focused on why the world must look at how Russia's war in Ukraine has affected global supply chains, in particular the grain supply chains, which have been very much impacted by Russia. Why do you think that this is the most important lesson that the transatlantic alliance needs to learn?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why this is one of the most important lessons for the transatlantic alliance needs to learn is because Russia is essentially holding a significant portion of the world's food supply hostage. When you disrupt the food supply chain, you are exacerbating food scarcity, in the most vulnerable locations and populations. And we saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic, when a lot of the food trade supply chains across the world were shut down, leading to critical supplies in no one could get them. Vaccines, N95 masks, basic healthcare, and we need to build redundancy within these trade systems so that we are self-sustainable in crises.
And Stephen, as Desi points out, Russia's war in Ukraine has highlighted areas of strategic vulnerability and key issues for future development. What do you think the most important lesson is that the U.S. and NATO can learn from Russia's war in Ukraine to enhance future security?
Well, regrettably, the war is not yet over, and so the lessons will depend in some sense on how this ends. But I think there's some things we can already learn from it. One is the point Desi makes about we've learned about the vulnerability of supply chains, global supply chains, not just on manufacturing, but food supply, fertilizer, all those other things. And the need to diversify and make those supply chains more resilient is clearly one of the lessons. I think one of the other lessons is the importance of alliances and the importance of solidarity. We are where we are in being able to support Ukraine because the United States has led and has been able to really assemble a remarkable coalition, not just in Europe, but really globally, to support the Ukrainians. So that, I think, is the first thing, solidarity. Secondly, I think the other thing we've learned is the importance of a local partner. You can only do so much from outside in terms of support. But if you don't have a country that's willing to fight for its own freedom, and a leader willing to rally that country, as President Zelensky has, you're not going to be able to get where you need to go and to be able to provide them the kind of support and to achieve what is my third point is, I think, one of the lessons is if you're going to get in a conflict, you need to have a strategy for win. I think one of the things we do in the United States sometimes is we put in enough military capability not to lose, but not enough to actually succeed and bring the war successfully to a close. And I think that's a lesson we're learning in Ukraine, and it requires, I think, for us to accelerate our supply and support militarily to Ukraine. I think the fourth lesson we're beginning to learn is, you can win the war and lose the peace. And winning the peace will depend a lot on economic support, both during the war and after the war. During the war so that Ukraine is able to sustain itself economically. It's in the first year of this war, its economy shrunk by about 30%. That's a huge hit to the economy. So we've got to have a strategy to help Ukraine both get through the war and then a strategy to help Ukraine rebuild after the war, because you can win the war and lose the peace, and whether you win the peace will depend a lot on what you can do economically. And these issues are very hard, as we learned in places like Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yes, unfortunately. And as I am a cybersecurity reporter, I want to look at how cyber attacks can, of course, disrupt supply chains as well for critical resources or for getting people out of a country, say Ukraine, when it was under attack. What have you seen in terms of lessons learned from the cyber attacks that have been used in Ukraine? And how can we prepare for future wars where cyber is used to disrupt key supply lines?
Well, we're learning a lot about cyber and the role of cyber here. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have been surprised that Russia has not made greater use of cyber, both within Ukraine, but also against those countries like the United States and Europe that are supporting Ukraine. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Within Ukraine, I think one of the things that the Ukrainians did with the help from the United States and Europe was they prepared for cyber defense. Second thing, they've been very innovative and adaptive in dealing with the cyber challenge. They've learned as they have gone, and I think they have really accomplished a lot in that respect. We're learning now in this book that is out on Elon Musk that shortly after the conflict began, Russia was able to take down the communications network that Ukraine and the military had been relied on. It was only because of the Starlink system that they were able to stand up a communication system which has been critical both to support the military and civilians. I think there are a lot of lessons about resilience and redundancy that we have to learn coming out of the Ukraine war. So this is, once again, a work in progress.
Indeed, an ongoing work in progress as well. And both for Desi and Stephen, we've seen a notable shift in the global security landscape. What do you both see as the defining security challenge that lies ahead for the next generation? And how can different generations of policymakers work together to solve these challenges? And Desi, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So the security challenge, in the way that I'm seeing it, that lies ahead is shifting from the traditional just-in-time supply chain model to a more resilient just-in-case model. And although this could be economically inefficient for the first while that it is implemented, it would force NATO countries to return manufacturing back to member nations, in turn creating more jobs and supporting the economy and building up national wealth, which is especially important as we're seeing in Ukraine, where we have a lot of countries, including the United States, which utilize outside countries that are not NATO member countries, sorry about that, to do a lot of our manufacturing and to do a lot of trade with. However, when we need critical supplies to send to our allies and to send to other people that we are supporting, we don't have them and we are reliant upon others. So if we can return our wealth back to our domestic borders, it will greatly increase our chances of being able to support more people and create more wealth.
Steve?
Well, Desi is the expert on supply chains, and I think she said it very well. I'll just focus on a few other things that I think we face, and I think that her generation is going to be struggling with. We all know about climate change. That's clearly something that we've got to deal with. I think one of the things we haven't focused so much about on climate change is the consequences for things like migration flows. We already have more refugees in the world than at any time since World War II. I think now the number actually exceeds the number that we had at the end of World War II. And as the effects of climate change and extreme weather in places like Africa become even more profound, the refugee problem is going to be even more difficult. And it's a humanitarian challenge, but as we've also seen, it's a political challenge for countries about what to do with these inflows of refugees. So that is, I think, something we're going to be struggling with for a considerable period of time. I think another thing is resource scarcity, both availability, distribution, and equity in terms of resources. This is going to be a challenge. It's about energy, it's about water, it's about food. I think this is going to be something that we're going to be struggling with for a long time. I would say one other thing we're going to deal with is ineffective governance. When you talk about governance, a lot of people think you mean, well, global governance. That is to say, the UN, multilateral institutions. those institutions are important, but I'm talking about something else, which is the ability of national governments to meet the expectations and needs of their peoples. We've seen that democratic governments have struggled to do that. It's what's caused a lot of people to think, well, maybe the authoritarians can do it better. We're beginning to see that authoritarian governments present other problems, as in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And we're also seeing in the case of China that authoritarian governments have problems in dealing with the challenges of the modern economy, as China faces a lot of economic problems. So I think this is a challenge really for all governments, how to be able to move more effectively in terms of meet the needs and desires of your people. So I would say at that level, we have a governance crisis. And I think, again, this is something that Desi and her generation are going to be dealing with for a long time.
Yes. Yes, there's a lot on your plate, Desi.
Yeah, but
not just your plate, but your generation. And turning back to you and to Steve, initiatives such as NATO 2030 and in the United States, the U.S. Digital Corps, among others, are actively seeking to include younger leaders in the policymaking process. So, Steve, what would you give as advice for current policymakers when it comes to younger policymakers who are attempting to make an impact? And Desi, following on that, as the winner of the competition, what's next for you? And I guess we'll start with Steve to give.
Well, my answer is very simple. Bring them in. Bring them in. And let me tell you 3 reasons why. I don't know if people have had a chance to look at Desi's resume, but let me just, she's a junior in high school. When I was a junior in high school, I was working at the local YMCA. And in the summer, I worked at a day camp, right? That's what I was doing in high school. Here's what Desi was doing. She was working with the Model United Nations. She had a number of awards in that connection. She was an internship at Leadership Initiatives, where one of the things she did was shape a security program for a state university in Nigeria. She was an intelligence support specialist for CIAT training partners, collaborating with the NSA and the Department of Defense. She's had mentors from both of those organizations. And to top that all, she also worked at the Office of the Mayor in Woodside, championing impactful community safety projects. So, you know, this is a generation that is committed, is engaged, and is prepared in a way that my generation is not. So that's substantively. Secondly, I would offer to you her report, which is terrific. I thought this is going to be a report. It's going to be on 8.5 by 11 paper, and it's all going to be a bunch of words. Well, this is charts and graphs and maps and all the rest. It's a terrific document. I wouldn't have the first knowledge about how to produce something like this. This is a generation that understands technology, is comfortable with technology, and is intuitive on terms of technology. And technology is going to be a huge driver of policy going forward. They're going to be more fit to deal with it than my generation is. And I would say, lastly, you know, most of probably a majority of the world now is young. If you look at Africa, you know, more than 50% of that population is under 30, probably under 25. And a lot of American policies are going to be, in terms of foreign policy, are going to be directed against this younger generation. Well, we know that each generation has its own attitudes, has its own approaches, and we're going to need our younger generation if we're going to fashion policies that are going to be responsive and speak to these younger generations around the world. So I think, you know, I'm prepared to turn it all over to you, but in any event, we need to bring the younger folks into the policy process for all of those reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said to Desi prior to our panel, I think she should come to Washington, D.C. next. I think there's a lot of space for her here. And as
you bet.
Yeah. And as I asked you,
Desi,
what's next for you as the winner of this competition?
I'm still trying to figure that out. This competition I entered not expecting anything, more doing it out of curiosity. My headmaster, who's also my advisor, put me up to it at my school, Shawnigan Lake. And he was like, you should enter this. Like, I think it would be really great. And I was like, okay. And I just got the call a couple of days ago that I was like, oh, you won. And I was like, what? What do you mean? So I'm only a junior in high school. I'm currently looking at colleges. I'm just starting that journey. But policy, global policy is something that I'm invested in and that I'm incredibly interested in. And my hope is to be present, mentored, and heard by experienced policymakers like Steve. They have so much knowledge, historical knowledge, that I will never get to have because of the generation that I am in. And there's so much that I can learn from that and that I want to absorb, because that would allow me to continue to formulate my own opinions and my own perspectives on politics, on global policy, so that I can continue to improve like other future policymakers and hopefully one day enter the world of policymaking.
Wow. Well, that's probably a higher achievements than a lot of 17-year-olds would have. So I'm personally very excited to watch your journey. Well, I want to thank you both for being here today and for taking the time to give such insightful answers to these questions. And I want to thank, of course, our audience for tuning into this conversation at the 2023 CEPA Forum, Winning the War, Winning the Peace. Please visit CEPA.org to view the CEPA Forum agenda, upcoming speakers, and recordings of the previous sessions in this forum. And of course, be sure to follow CEPA's social media accounts to watch the rest of the forum and stay up to date on the latest analysis and upcoming events with #CEPA Forum. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you.